Welcome back, all you awesome listeners, to another episode of Untangling Climate Finance. I'm Jay Tipton from Gordian Strategies. In this episode, I connect with Jodi Manning, the CEO of Cool Effect, to talk about the voluntary carbon market, strong carbon projects, and what it takes to scale real climate impact. Cool Effect is celebrating a decade of climate action. During that time, they've reviewed over 10,000 carbon projects and channeled more than $84 million to verified high-integrity projects on the ground. Now that is some serious climate finance. From methane abatement to blue carbon and biochar, they're focused on carbon solutions that matter and making them accessible to both organizations and individuals. Jodi brings a sharp perspective rooted in brand building and digital strategy, coupled with a lifelong connection to land stewardship. Together, we discuss what makes high-integrity carbon credits, rigorous due diligence, scientific credibility, financial additionality, and community accountability. We also explore broader trends in the voluntary carbon market. The VCM has been a pivotal force in climate finance, mobilizing more than $16 billion in long-term carbon market funding in 2024 alone. While the VCM today accounts for just a small slice of global climate finance, it has the potential to scale exponentially and play a critical role in closing the world's $1.3 trillion per year climate finance gap. Finally, we talk about demand trends and why price transparency is foundational to trust and growth in climate finance. All right, now it's Jodi time. Hi, Jodi. Welcome to Untangling Climate Finance. How are you doing today?
Jay, I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining. Where in the world are you?
Cool Effect is located just north of the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin County, so we're in the Bay Area.
And that's where you are as well.
Yes, it is. I've had a lot of travel to different projects over the summer, but happy to be back at the home office right now.
Right on. Are you a native Californian?
I am not. I actually grew up in Iowa, and ironically, I'm a fifth generation family farm, small farm owner still in Iowa, but I've lived in California for 25 years.
All right. I did a similar thing. I grew up in Indiana, and then right after university, I went out west, and I was in LA for about 10 years before moving to Europe. So I have a similar trajectory of Midwest plains over to the West Coast as you.
Yeah. Well, we spent many years on the East Coast, both New York and Boston, but haven't made it to Europe yet. But that is a potential retirement strategy. So I'm envious of you.
Yeah. It's not a bad one. If you need any tips or suggestions, you know where to reach me. Happy to answer anything there. Cool. All right. So before we get into Cool Effect, why don't you tell me a bit about your background and then how you ended up at Cool Effect working on climate and carbon markets?
That sounds great. Actually, my background is I was a group creative director for many years at some of the largest agencies around the United States, Ogilvy and Mather, Publicis, Arnold Communications, Digitas. I worked on many, many different brands. I worked in both what were called traditional mediums, brand building, advertising, Super Bowl, TV, all of those things, and then got into building online platforms when the digital craze took over. And it was that experience that brought me to Cool Effect. About 10 years ago, I met Dee and Richard Lawrence just at a social engagement. Dee and Richard are climate philanthropists, and they've been in the carbon market for 20 or so years now. And they had an idea to build a platform to make the carbon credits and the projects accessible to anybody who wanted to take climate action. So they were looking both to bring their idea to life by creating a brand, but also creating a digital platform that actually was accessible and was functional and provided some great feedback. So in combination with that, having grown up in Iowa, having grown up on a family farm, understanding the rich heritage of giving back to the land, I also was very, very adamant about climate because it's been a part of my entire life.
Yeah.
My dad was a steward of the land, and before him, my grandfather. So it's something that I've always been aware of and something that I've also participated in.
Yeah.
So it was a really great way to combine both my mission personally, as well as Dee and Richard's mission, which is really unflappable.
Well, it sounds like you were a very natural fit for Cool Effect and carbon projects.
Well, it probably was, although I didn't know anything about carbon projects before I started. And I think in some ways that was beneficial.
Yeah.
Because most people don't. I also think I had never worked for a nonprofit, and Dee and Richard were adamant that they wanted to run Cool Effect with very outstanding, unique personalities that oftentimes really great ethical businesses run themselves by. And so we created a really unique platform based on the integrity of being a nonprofit, but also, some really sound business practices, such as price transparency, that have helped us tremendously as we've grown.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think that you're right, that your background of not really knowing what a carbon project is probably did serve you quite well, in that role, because of course, like a lot of it is explaining what's going on here. And so to that extent, of course, we have some listeners that know what Cool Effect is, but of course we will have some that do not. So why don't you describe more specifically what Cool Effect actually does, and as well as its mission?
Sure. So Cool Effect, first of all, is a nonprofit. We are a certified 501c3. So in this space, not everybody is a nonprofit, but Cool Effect is. Our mission is to find the truly transformative carbon projects around the globe and bring them to anybody, make them accessible to anybody who really wants to participate and take climate action. So we believe that every ton matters. In the early days, we talked a lot about the butterfly effect, which is what we fashioned the Cool Effect name around, which is that small actions can actually have global impact. So we're proud to have reduced over 10 million tons of carbon harmful gases, and we have sent over $84 million directly to carbon projects in the 10 years that we've been at this. But we started with education. And we started by really trying to make an overwhelming topic much more accessible. And we did that both with climate and also with carbon, because I think both of those categories have the same type of challenges. People can easily get overwhelmed. They can easily feel like whatever they do is not going to be big enough. But we really wanted to be able to give them hope that both their contribution and their continued participation with reduction and with decarbonization over time was really going to help.
Exactly. And as you'd said, of course, transparency is very valuable to Cool Effect. And as an end user of Cool Effect, as I told you before we started this conversation, that I myself have purchased offsets for the past 4 or 5 years from Cool Effect, I can very confidently say that I feel like the transparency part of your whole business model is true. And so that's highly valuable, as well as your project integrity. And I know that that is something that you also focus on, as I've had these discussions with Dee in the past. And so can you explain how Cool Effect goes about ensuring that the carbon projects you list on the website are scientifically verified and truly impactful, as you said, because impact is extremely valuable?
Yeah, Jay, you're right. There's really 2 components. First of all, there's the work that the project team does going around the globe, literally around the globe, to find carbon projects. We are type agnostic, meaning what we're looking for is a project that's truly beneficial to the atmosphere, not necessarily a certain project type. So we'll look at nature-based projects, we'll look at technology-based projects, we'll look at reduction projects, we'll look at removals. They do have to have proper verification and certification from one of the major standards. That's really important because that brings a lot of security as far as the actual operational pieces of the credit being issued and retired. So that is one of the first things that we do. After that, we have a really, really deep process for vetting both the scientific part of the project. And again, I keep getting back to, is it have environmental integrity? Is it actually beneficial to the atmosphere? We have to keep that in mind because that is number one, the most important thing.
Yeah.
We look at all aspects of that depending on what type of project it is. So for example, a forestry project, we're looking at the baseline. We're going to bring in satellite technology to look to see if it's properly crediting. Is a ton really a ton? Those types of things. For a nature-based project, we're going to look at the number of trees planted. We're going to look at how was that process handled. Was the forest properly managed? Those types of things. And for a technology-based project, we're looking at the fundamentals of the science behind it. How is the durability being calculated? Do we have belief from a scientific perspective that the carbon removal is actually happening? So depending on the project type, there's a really, really deep analysis that we do. We also dig really deeply into the financials of the project. First of all, we're looking at financial additionality, meaning would the project be functioning without carbon finance? And if the answer is yes, it would be functioning without carbon finance, that means it's not additional. And this is the area where most projects fall out of our due diligence process. We're looking for projects that truly rely on carbon, and we're looking that the carbon finance and revenue is being invested back into the project to help it grow and help it either avoid or reduce even more carbon and harmful gases. So all of those things are really, really important. That's to say, we start with documentation. We have deep conversations with the project developers. And probably one of the things that is most unique about Cool Effect is then we go and we visit the projects. We want to see firsthand what's going on, not only the project team that's there on the ground, but also meet the management team. We want to see how they interact. We want to see what's going on with the local communities and how the project is impacted. We also do a really deep dive on, any type of social justice issue. We want to know who's owning the land. We want to know if jobs are being created. Sometimes project types have health benefits to the local communities, or they support certain sectors, such as women who really don't have access to jobs. So we take into account all of those things as well. So it's a really, really deep process of trying to find the projects. But you're right. After we do find a project, and by the way, our team has reviewed around 10,000 carbon projects in the 10 years that we've been doing this.
Whoa.
And only 64 of those projects have been represented by us.
Wow. That's unbelievable. That is a huge number. And obviously that is a much lower approval rate. So of course your DD is extremely comprehensive. Wow. 10,000 is massive. As you said, you're traveling to projects. So hopefully that doesn't mean you've gone to actually site visit 10,000 projects and you kind of check them off the list before you're flying all over the world a little bit through earlier stages of assessment.
No. You're right. We have corporate buyers who will come to us specifically asking for a certain project type. So, for example, corporate buyers oftentimes will work directly with the projects, but they'll come to Cool Effect because we have such deep relationships with the project developers and because we had done initial diligence. So, for example, we had a corporate buyer who really wanted to buy some landfill gas in the U.S., and we looked at 120, maybe 130 different projects, and not a single one of them was additional.
Wow.
So to your point, we didn't visit those projects because we could tell right away that they weren't.
Yeah. Thank God for various levels of due diligence that can X project off the list before you have to fly to wherever it's at. Okay, got it. So if I am a project developer and I have a project, how do I get in front of Cool Effect? Do you guys have a preferred method, like directly applying through your website, or is it a combination of you catch wind of projects through other developers, or maybe it's a blend of these things? But if I'm a project developer listening to this episode and I think to myself, I have a project I would like for Cool Effect to review, what's the method of doing that?
Yeah, write to us at business@cooleffect.org. We try to respond to everybody. There's some project types that are more sought after right now than some other project types, but we review projects all the time. And it doesn't mean that we wouldn't pass a project along to somebody who might be looking for what they're offering. And so, for example, water projects, we will have a lot of projects that actually don't have carbon credits that write to us as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that we won't help you or help pass along to the right thing. We're connectors, basically, because we're getting inquiries all the time. But write to us and we'll be happy to take a look.
Very good. And I will make sure to include that email address in the show notes. So for anybody listening, you will have access to it there. Jodi, we at Gordian Knot Strategies also sit in this kind of position where we see both sides of the project. And with that, we have seen demand for specific project types fluctuate, as I know you have. Given that we're halfway through July, what are the particular project types that you have seen consistent demand for this year?
I think that would fall into roughly two categories. First of all, removals are very popular. A lot of buyers and a lot of individuals and organizations actually are interested in carbon removal. And by that, we mean any type of project that pulls or reduces carbon and takes it from the air. So that could be the planting of trees. Mangroves, which are referred to as blue carbon, are very, very popular. All of those different types of nature-based. Soil is another one, although soil hasn't really come to market yet. But there's a lot of nature-based type projects that are carbon removals. And on the other spectrum, there's a lot of technology-based removals that are either just starting to come to market or they're in development. The ones that are coming to market right now, biochar comes to mind right away. We do have a lot of interest in biochar because not only is it a removal, but it's a long-term removal, meaning it's closer to 1,000 years, depending on the project, rather than 100 years. Mm-hmm. So biochar has been very, very popular. I mentioned blue carbon, and I'll go back to blue carbon because there's a lot of desire to protect both the oceans and also to protect the shorelines because of the dramatic sea level rise that's happening. So there's not a lot of blue carbon that's in the market and available right now, but Cool Effect made investments 7 years ago to get mangroves planted in certain areas of the world. And those are now producing certified carbon reduction and removals. So we're very excited to have those to offer as well. The other really important product category has become the avoidance of superpollutants. Superpollutants are non-CO2 gases. So they're methane, they're HFCs, they're nitrous. They're the gases that are incredibly harmful to the environment over a shorter term period. It's been said that if we reduce methane now, it's similar to a down payment on climate, meaning if we can get some kind of scale at reducing and avoid putting these harmful gases in the atmosphere, it'll buy us a little bit more time to bring some of the most important developments to market. So reduction of methane, reduction of HFC, it's become incredibly important. So on the other side of that, on the project side of that, one of the most popular and most effective ways to reduce methane is the capturing of methane that comes off of landfills. So any kind of large landfill is just seeping methane from the garbage.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, in the developing world, there's not this same rigor to collecting garbage and collecting waste as there is here in the United States and in the more developed world. The trash just simply would not be collected without these carbon projects doing this hard work. So we have done a rigorous exploration of different landfill gas projects, and we've ended on several that we represent now, primarily in Brazil. And also, we do a lot of work with project types that are reducing HFCs or ODS. So those are the super pollutant type of projects that bring a really incredibly measurable and valuable carbon compensation to market.
I'm glad to see that those are getting attention because they truly do have such deep impact. And I feel that the positive benefits of like focusing on those types of projects and moving climate finance towards those projects is pretty enormous.
Yeah, it can have incredible impact. There was a public announcement from Google that they are supporting super pollutants. We were part of that announcement with a couple of other projects, but we did a really vast look into different projects for them for that particular announcement. And since then, we've seen a lot of additional interest, a lot of people coming to us to, first of all, explain what super pollutants are and get a better understanding of how they work. And everybody 100% sees the incredible and immediate impact that we can have just by avoiding putting these emissions into the atmosphere. Through the nonprofits, we also do a lot of additional work. We sponsor the Global Methane Hub. Carbon Mapper is a methane satellite that we use. We can see landfills that are leaking. There's a lot of different tools that we can now bring to market to really help us evaluate which of these landfills are doing the right thing.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that, truly. More attention there. So I'm glad that you guys are involved in bringing some action around that in particular. Okay, so you and I both know, and most people listening to this podcast will probably know that the voluntary carbon market over the last 18 months has been very rapidly evolving. Of course, like Cool Effect has a very strong position as a market player in the middle of the VCM. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, what improvements or innovations have you all been advocating for in the market to make it better?
Well, two things. So Cool Effect has been true to its mission from the very beginning. We've been talking about high quality projects and a quality carbon credit from the start. So I think we've gotten a little louder about what we think it takes to be a high quality, really positive for both the environment, for people and planet is what we say oftentimes. So I think from some perspective, that hasn't necessarily changed as much as we've begun to amplify it more. The other really important aspect, which Jay, you tipped before, which is Cool Effect has a just radical dedication to price transparency. And Richard, from the very, very beginning, having been in the financial markets for decades, really feels that without financial transparency, there's no trust. And without trust, the market won't grow. So it's very important for us to make sure that both the buyer and the project developer understand the pricing of the credit. We want to make sure that everybody understands that our fee is a flat 9.87%. We want them to understand how we use it. We want them to understand that what our mission is to make sure that the majority of each dollar goes back to the project to help them fund the activities that they need to do, monitoring, verification, ongoing work of the project. So price transparency is really, really important. I also think that we're on the cusp of two improvements, which are both long-term. One is the actual documentation. So we struggle every day with documentation, trying to do our due diligence. The standards even have different levels, different degrees of standardization in their documentation, and it varies a lot. So if you're just someone trying to figure out what to do and you get two sets of documentations and you're looking at it, trying to figure out which project is better than the other, it's very, very difficult. So we're pushing for and hoping to see an evolution and more standardized, deeper documentation. Price transparency also applies to the carbon projects. We push them very hard to tell us how they're using the money, to show us the financials. We understand that carbon projects, oftentimes they have loans. We realize loans have to be paid back, but we don't want to see 100% of all the revenue going to the loans. It really has to be a much more sophisticated and thoughtful and transparent on their side in terms of disclosing how the carbon revenue is actually being used. So that's, I think, some really big improvements that we need to see to build up the market. There's also a lot of different entities working on quality. There's the rating agencies, there's the ICBCM coming out with the CCPs, so there's now more tools in the market to help individuals and corporates actually determine quality. So I think all of those things are new. The only other thing I'll mention is for the last 2 to 3 years, we've been hearing a lot about satellite and how satellite is going to help specifically with forestry and with us understanding some of these other project types and the impact or the lack of impact they may be having. And we've been dabbling with satellite for a while, and I feel like satellite is finally coming to a place where it has been very beneficial the last year.
Yeah, there's been a lot of news about satellite and companies that are working with that particular tech in the last 12 months, like raising money and expanding it. So I totally agree with you there. And I'm excited to see what kind of benefits those have for projects. I mean, we've already seen a decent amount of it in terms of like the science and the integrity, but I think that it's still getting its footing. And this second half of the year and then most of next year, we're going to really see the fruit of the labor from these companies. And that's exciting. That's exciting from integrity perspective. And from all of the other improvements and innovations that you pointed out, I could not agree more. So I appreciate those. Thank you for highlighting those because I think you're right on the money. Jodi, the next question is a bit personal for me because as I had said earlier, I, as an individual over the past 5 years, at the end of the year or at the beginning of the following year, go through the process of calculating my carbon footprint and then using Cool Effect to offset my annual emissions. And if I rewind the clock back to February when we were together for a forum in Boulder, I remember one of the things that you said on a panel that you were speaking on was how individuals can also make contributions. And so I make my individual contribution this way. And usually when we're talking about the voluntary carbon market, we're focusing on businesses, which of course we should because businesses have a huge role to play in this entire thing. But I, as a motivated individual, also feel that we ourselves can do something. And so I guess my question is, for those that are interested in making a difference or a contribution, what advice would you give them to do so, to make a difference? Because I remember you pointing out that you think that that's a stone that's yet to be unturned. And I agree with you. So if you have any advice, I would love to hear it for the listeners that might want to get involved.
Jay, first of all, thank you for your continued contributions and for stepping up, in your leadership in climate action. Just the fact that you're calculating and you're aware. I think there's a huge opportunity with individuals, and a lot of it just starts with simply awareness. In the early days of Cool Effect, we did some polling really and talked to individuals. First of all, a lot of people didn't understand that a metric ton, which is how carbon is calculated, how much that was. A metric ton is about the size of a helium balloon. And the average American emits about 16 to 17 metric tons per year. That's an average, and it can go up and down depending on primarily how much travel you do.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. So we set out initially to do a lot of education just around some basic premises. The number one thing any individual or organization of any size can do is decarbonize. So it doesn't matter if you are going to the grocery store 6 times a week, make sure you're bringing your own bag. I know that sounds somewhat trite and probably like a tip you've heard a million times, but that is incredibly important. The majority of the single-use plastic and the majority of the waste that we can reduce, the better. It is going to have impact. Composting, recycling, all of these things really matter. Using your own water bottle, right? Those things matter. Understand where your food is coming from. Collectively, if we all take just some accountability for that, it will help tremendously. And then I think the next big thing, and the thing that I do talk the most about, is actually travel. Travel has a huge impact. And so, I think outside of agriculture, it's one of the top 3. So think about, do you really need to take that trip? If you really do, and we all do, even those of us at Cool Effect have to travel, right? Consider, how are you traveling? Is there a train available? Recently, when I was in Europe, again, Jay, really admiring you being in Europe, I was able to take the train a lot of different places. Can you take mass transportation? All of those things. So reduce as much as you can. But if you are on a flight and you are then aware that you have to take a flight, look at compensating that with a really strong carbon offset. And the reason I say it that way is because we've done a lot of work both on travel offset and understanding what travel offset is available in the market. There's a lot of travel offset programs that are highly criticized, and to be frank, rightfully so. I did a really broad look at different travel offset programs, and I couldn't believe how many don't even say what the project is. They don't say how your money is being used. And the pricing was all over the map, right? And so it started to end up feeling to me more like a tax or an add-on, as opposed to really a truly high quality travel offset. But I think that those are places, do everything you can to decarbonize. Make sure if you're using renewable energy or requesting renewable energy from your grid provider, do what you can to reduce waste, and then consider your travel.
Those were great. And I think as somebody that does that, and for people that are interested, you could purchase an offset for your travel and it's not going to break the bank. And one way to kind of get ahead of it is to just budget it into your travel at the beginning. Is like, this is an expense that I'm going to have as part of any travel that you take when you consider getting a coffee or going out to dinner or you're renting a hotel. And so I feel like if people tag this expense as part of the overall trip, then it just feels a little bit more organic for them. And it really isn't going to break the bank. It's crazy. Like the cost of flights and stuff, when you consider that versus, adding on a couple offsets to handle the tons of emissions from the travel, it's pretty negligible on an individual basis. So your recommendations were great. People should absolutely try and adhere to those. And they can go a step further. Absolutely consider buying offsets for travel. And as somebody who's done the greenhouse gas annual calculation, it's less painful than doing taxes, right? There's a lot of tools out there that are very simple, make it really easy and give you kind of a pretty comprehensive understanding. So there's a lot of avenues there. So excellent. I appreciate that, Jodi. So we're winding down time. Why don't you tell me, as we look ahead to the rest of the year, what is on the horizon for Cool Effect the last 6 months of this year and then maybe early 2026?
Sure. Well, Cool Effect is celebrating 10 years. We're thankful to have reduced 10 million tons. Yes, we launched in 2015 at the Paris COP. So we're looking at 10 years of being in the market. We're really proud to have sent over $84 million directly to carbon projects doing the hard work on the ground. That is because of our community of, 500,000 individuals, but also corporate buyers that we work with. So we're really happy about that. But we're using this milestone as a way for ourselves, more as a call to action, because we actually have a gigaton problem here. So while we're really proud of our achievements, we actually know that we have to increase and accelerate our climate action at an even more impactful rate. So, and this is both in terms of our decarbonization efforts and also our compensation efforts. So we got to avoid putting more harmful gases in. I talked about super pollutants. So we're going to double down on that and get the word out as much as we can. We also want to do more education because education inspires people. And cool fact, we want to be a positive brand. We want to bring real rally cry, real momentum to the market. So we think that those things are really, really important. We've also made a big commitment in 25 and 26 to do more site visits. I myself just returned from Africa and Germany. So I want to bring those stories, the stories of the projects and the people on the front lines, what they're doing. I'm also really, really hoping that we can see a shift in the narrative, not only around climate, but specifically around carbon. There's a lot of negativity about carbon. I do believe that some of it is valid. I understand a lot of the concerns, but oftentimes the people that are surfacing the negativity are not providing any alternative. And I think those of us that are deep into the carbon market are working hard to bring up the quality and bring up the mechanics of how we're addressing climate. Because I just truly think that every time I read an article, a negative article, there's actually no actionable ideas. It's really just negative.
Yeah, that always grinds my gears as well. As a solution-oriented person, I don't mind if people come out with criticisms, but if there is no kind of alternative or call to action towards it, I'm just like, well, and then what? So I'm right there with criticism is oftentimes deserved, and we should, of course, speak about these types of things in a constructive manner. But if it just kind of ends there without a next step, it's a head scratcher. You're like, well, what good is this? Let's create solutions for our challenges that we have. So I could not agree with you more, Jodi. And congrats on the 10-year mark. That's fantastic and impressive. And I have no doubt that you will achieve your milestones and your goals. So you've got a great team over there. You guys you'll knock it out of the park. All right. So the last question is a question that I ask all of the guests. So you've probably heard this on past episodes, and it comes from Stoicism. Epictetus once said, "What concerns me is not the way things are, but the way people think things are." And so, Jodi, if we adapt this to climate finance specifically, my question is, what do you think is one thing that must be done to change how people think about climate finance?
Well, right now, unfortunately, we're in a pattern where climate is being funded as a reaction to devastating events. And I really would like to see that turn to be a more proactive mitigation strategy as opposed to a reactive coming in during devastation. I truly believe climate finance is actually an investment in a better future. When I go to carbon projects and I talk to people who are really doing this hard work every day, they always talk to me about how this is an investment for the next generation, for their children and for their grandchildren. What kind of world do we want to hand them? And as a mother of 2 kids, I think about that every day too. So when I think about climate finance, I do understand the risk. But to me, the bigger risk is if we do nothing. So we really need to double down on our efforts of getting the money to the right places and ensuring that the finance is doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is helping people and planet.
Beautiful final words, Jodi. Those were strong. I appreciate that. And again, I think we're so aligned, you and I, because I could not agree more with you. It's like when you talk about the words finance, a common word that's usually in the same sentence is investment. If we apply that to climate, we're absolutely investing. We're investing in a better future and a better world to live in. And so I'm with you. Like, let's just flip the script. It doesn't have to always be reactive. We can invest towards the future. So thank you for that. I'd love to hear that from you. And I can't wait to bold letter that in the newsletter that I send out to everybody. So thanks.
Yay. Thank you so much for inviting me and for featuring Cool Effect and our nonprofit mission.
It was my pleasure, Jodi. Thank you for joining, and we will talk soon.
Yes, I hope to see you very soon.
Likewise. Bye.
Bye.
That was a powerful conversation. Huge thanks to Jodi Manning for joining me and sharing such a grounded, honest look at what it really takes to drive impact in the voluntary carbon market. From site visits to satellite data, and from methane reduction to individual climate action, Jodi gave us a full spectrum view of how Cool Effect is working to raise the bar. So thanks again, Jodi. Also, I've included links in the show notes to various things that she referenced, so be sure to check those out. And hey, before you go, hit subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you're on Spotify, tap the bell so you never miss an episode. You can also catch up on past conversations and sign up for our weekly newsletter Sliced for bite-sized insights on climate finance, carbon markets, and sustainability. All right, I'll see you next month for another deep dive into the forces shaping climate finance. Thanks again for tuning in, and stay cool. This podcast is brought to you by Gordian Strategies.